Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week is a former producer in the video game world who has made analog gaming his career. He's worked for Konami and Raven Games, but is best known in the tabletop world as the founder of Thunderworks Games, who started with the rip-roaring hit Role Player and have gone on to publish such games as Tenpenny Parks, Cape May, and the Kennerspiel des Jahres-nominated Cartographers. My guest this week is Keith Matejka. Keith, welcome to the cabin.
Hey, thanks. That was a sweet intro.
So my first question then is, how difficult was it for you to pick the 5 games to take to the cabin?
Surprisingly difficult. So, I'm like very critical when it comes to games. And in today's day and age where there's so many games coming out, like I rarely get to play a game, maybe more than 4 times or whatever. So it was difficult. Like, the idea that these are the only 5 games you're going to have for who knows how long. And there's the variability of a game to keep it interesting over time is like an important thing. Whereas when I'm just kind of picking my favorite games, that's not always such an important thing, So it was hard, like with just kind of keeping that one variable in mind of there are no other games coming, so make sure that you're going to enjoy playing these 5 for a very, very long time. So it was challenging.
And was it pure practicality, or was there any sort of sentimentality in your choices?
Well, I mean, there's definitely I've got my I think some of my, I skipped over some of my favorite games, but I did include my favorite for sure. So it's a mix of both, but I would say it's probably more on the side of practicality than kind of emotional, factors.
I mean, what kind of person are you? Do you have an insanely large collection, and would you be absolutely mortified if it went up in a conflagration, or do you keep it lean and mean?
I mean, I have a moderate sized game collection. I think most people go through that phase of like, where they get into games and they want to play everything because everything's fresh and new. And then you kind of hit some plateau in which you've played a lot of games, and new games oftentimes are either, very similar to other games that you've played that you like better, or they're not kind of bringing anything new to the table anymore because you've had so many experiences. I am not a hoarder by any stretch of the imagination. So I'll play a game. I like it. Like if I don't like a game after I play it, I will try to get rid of it right away. And then the other ones that I'll hold on, they will just be kind of permanent staples in my collection. And then it turns into one of those things where does this new game fire an old game? And if it does, then the old one goes. So I keep a collection of, I don't know, maybe 400 games. And I've some of them I hold on to just for kind of analytical, project specific reasons. Some component is really interesting in a game, and maybe I want to kind of look at that again in the future when I'm working on a similar game, or silly things box size. These games are all in this one box size. Maybe I like this box size. I want to make sure I have one around for when I'm working on a game in the future that I think might be good for that box size. So there are some weird kind of not gameplay specific reasons why I hold on to some games. And then I think everybody has certain games they'll pick up because they have a certain person in mind that they're going to play that with, So my son is 11 years old. He loves trains. So I might hold on to some train games because I think he would like them versus if I don't really like the game that much and that factor wasn't there, maybe I would get rid of it. I am the type of person that I don't really let my collection grow that much, but there's always kind of things coming in and leaving.
So let's go back to the beginning then. So for those outside of America, and a lot of the Americans that I know too, who are terrible East Coast elitists, Wisconsin is not a place that's forefront in the consciousness. Can you tell us about Wisconsin? The only thing I know about Wisconsin is cheese, right?
Right, sure. So, Wisconsin is a great place for gamers. If you've the biggest convention, gaming convention in the U.S. is Gen Con, and Gen Con started in Wisconsin. So the Gen of Gen Con is short for Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which is where Gary Gygax and a bunch of the people that kicked off the early days of Dungeons and Dragons were from. Right, so Wisconsin has a very rich history in fantasy and gaming, and it still is to this day. So, and Wisconsin is geographically, it's right in the smack of the middle of the country at the north part. So we're right next to the Great Lakes in the U.S. and where I'm at, Madison, Wisconsin, is the capital of the state, and we're an hour and a half from Chicago, the third. I think it's the third largest city in the U.S. So it is. Cheese is a big thing, right? So farmlands, once you get out of the cities, is a big thing. Wisconsin people love their sporting events. Our football team, the Green Bay Packers, is like, they won the first two big championships when that started, and there's a lot of people that are very, kind of ingrained in the sporting culture. There's a great university system here, the University of Wisconsin. People are very adamant, or not adamant, but very excited to root for those teams as well. But, I live in Madison. We have like kind of a disproportionate number of game stores per capita than a normal city. I think I'd have to look up what our population is, but, there's a solid, 6 game stores in this medium-sized city. Like you can't throw a stick without hitting a game store around here. So, there's a very strong group of game designers, and a few publishers as well. So probably the most prolific designer from Wisconsin is King Klenko, who is a good friend of mine. He did Fuse and Dead Men Tell No Tales, and he and I have been friends for a long time. I game with him regularly. But there's other, published designers here. There's a company called The Game Crafter, in which people can upload files and get like print-on-demand games. That's located here in Madison, which is really, really nice for me because I can just run over there and pick it up on my way home from work. So, I would say Madison in particular is really strong for gaming, though we are, the second biggest city in Wisconsin, the first being Milwaukee. That's more than you ever wanted to know about Wisconsin.
If anyone ever asks me about Wisconsin now, I can just point them to this show. So you went to university to study media. How did that help you in your future career?
So it's my degree. I have my bachelor's degree is actually in music recording technology, and then I have a minor in television, radio, and film media, and then another minor in business. So it's kind of this weird grouping of things. And my first love has always been music, and I played in bands for most of my life, and I played obviously at the university in orchestras and stuff. But then I ended up getting a degree in recording, and I worked in recording studios, and I don't know, like in my life, I've always been like really passionate about something, and then I do it for a while and I kind of see how the sausage is made, and then I kind of tend to burn out on that thing, and then I move on to another love. And the second love was my love for video games. And then I worked in video games for 15 years, and now the next love is board games, and now I'm doing board games. And so part of my personal quest is to like keep that in the front of my mind so I can like minimize me burning out on board games, because I love what I'm doing and I don't want to make any changes anytime soon. But that degree that I have in music and recording and technology and media and business, all those things, led me down certain paths, right? So when I was in video games, my musical knowledge kind of got me into, got the attention of the people that were working on music video games at the time at Konami, like Dance Dance Revolution and Beatmania, Guitar Freaks, and all, and those types of games. And I ended up working on a bunch of singing games called Karaoke Revolution. And actually, some of those were one of those versions in particular was American Idol themed, and I got to fly to London and do some recording sessions with Simon Cowell, and that was pretty fun. As an anecdote. But,
is he an absolutely dreadful arsehole like he is on the telly?
He's totally not. He's like, well, I don't know. He seems very pragmatic, and like he's very down to earth, which is similar to the way I am. I think on TV he plays a bit of a character, but I thought he was great. He knows what he wants, and when you're trying to do amazing stuff, it's nice to have somebody who knows what they want, right? So that was a cool experience for sure. But and so I worked on video games, music video games, and then continuing to work on my love for games led into kind of finding board games again, which then led to me transitioning off of there. So when I was working on video games, I was doing production. So that's a lot of project management, tracking things, managing teams, making sure your artists are getting their work done and that everybody has what they need to move forward, coordinating different people, and like all those skills that I really built when I was doing video games, like transitioned over to my work in board games as well, right? So I have a lot of experience helping manage these multi-million-dollar projects, and I can use that knowledge and that experience managing these Kickstarter projects or managing these board game projects, which is on a much smaller scale, but it's a much smaller team as well. So all these things have contributed. I wouldn't say my love for music is currently helping me out in board games, but kind of the things that I've learned along the way have gotten me here and contributed for sure. So you mentioned a music-based board game. I don't know.
So you mentioned you got back into board games. I mean, when did hobby games enter your life, and what were the games that really blew you away?
Sure. I mean, when I was young, I had a babysitter that would bring over board games, and that was kind of the exposure to things outside of kind of the usual suspects, being the Clue or Cluedo and Sorry and Monopoly, like those kind of classic games. Like this babysitter would bring over other games that they had. And I remember vividly two of them that I still have copies of today and are still in print. One is Scotland Yard, which I remember playing as a 8 to 10-year-old kid. I still have my copy from the 80s. And the other one being Survive, which was republished 5-10 years ago by Stronghold. So I still have those copies of those games. I still love them. I have the new versions as well. But those were the kind of games that I really liked when I was young. And then, there was this period of time in which I didn't play many board games. It was more focused on video games and the like. But I got back into board games when I moved. So I lived in California, Northern California, the San Francisco Bay Area for 7 years when I was working at Konami. And we moved back to Wisconsin. And three things happened simultaneously. One, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends again from college. And I was like, man, this takes a really long time. like I don't know if I have time to sit and play D&D for 8 to 10 hours like I did when I was in college, but I like these kind of experiences. So then I started looking at other things like, Descent was out, and I was like, well, it's kind of like playing D&D, but it's not. I foolishly thought it wasn't going to take as long. Or things like Arkham Horror, which at the time was very complex when I first, I'd never played anything that complex before, and that took quite a long time when I first played it. But that was another kind of role-playing like experience that's in a board game that felt like it had a more finite ending to it. So like it wasn't going to be this 12-hour commitment every 2 weeks with my friends that as a college student I had time for. As an adult with like a real job, I didn't have time for. The second thing being we just moved to a new city, and I was looking for opportunities to make new friends and kind of get out there and kind of rebuild some kind of social group. So I started looking for board game groups because Wisconsin, I didn't mention, is very known for their alcohol consumption. There's like I think more bars per capita in Wisconsin than any other state in the
Sounds like my kind of place.
yeah. There's more bars than churches in this place, but like I mean, as you know, like going to the bar is really expensive. Well, it can be. Well, I didn't realize that like being a board gamer is actually really expensive too. But, at the time, I didn't realize that. So I started looking for online groups, and there was a few of them, and I just started going to them and meeting people and trying new games and doing that. And the third thing is I had a friend that from California that visited me, and he's Puerto Rican, and name. Anyway, I had a friend from Puerto Rico that visited me in Wisconsin, and he just for some reason is like, hey, I looked on this crazy website called BoardGameGeek.com, which I'd never heard of. It's like the number one game is Puerto Rico. We should go find it at a store because I want to play it because I'm Puerto Rican. So we had never played like a traditional Euro game before, and we just went to the store and picked it up and spent all weekend like we played it like 4 or 5 times. And so that was kind of my introduction to Euro games. And so those three things kind of bound together, plus the fact that like I was working a job actually in QA at Raven Software, where like I could listen to podcasts all day long if I wanted to, and I found this podcast called The Dice Tower with this guy named Tom Vassell that was in South Korea doing these podcasts, and so I was like all in, like all day I'm listening about board games, I'm learning about all the stuff, and like I dove in head first, and I just couldn't get enough information, and I couldn't find enough hours in the day to get my gaming on. So that was kind of my rebirth into board gaming. And then at some point, we just decided, like me and my friends at Raven Software, where we worked on making video games, mainly Call of Duty titles, and we just played card games and stuff on lunch. And we're like, well, we make video games all day long. It can't be that hard to make a board game. So, ignorance is bliss. And we just started working on some. And the other two gentlemen kind of lost interest, but I was really excited by it and kept working on it. And eventually, like I came up with a title that I thought I could go to Kickstarter, because at the time, Kickstarter was this brand new thing. And guys like Jamie Stegmeyer and James Matthew were publishing these blogs that were kind of giving away all their secrets about how to kickstart a board game or a card game. And it didn't seem that hard to me. So I decided to kind of put my first game on Kickstarter, and then, away we go. That's 10 years later, we're talking about it.
So your first game then is Descent First Edition. Now, why have you chosen the first edition over the other iterations? And you mentioned, you didn't have time for D&D, and Descent First Edition is famous for being very long.
Yeah, it can be long. I think maybe that's the thing. You're in the cabin in the woods. You got all the time in the world now, right? So it doesn't matter if it's long. Is one of the other things that I thought was fun about it. And there's so much content for it. And I don't know, like I like the turn structure. I like the way the first edition works better than the later ones. Yes, it is longer. I appreciate that they shortened it in the second edition, and the third edition is kind of its own beast. But I don't know, the first edition I think is cool. I think I really, even though the scenarios are really broken, but like they put out that nice hardcover book of like additional scenarios from designers outside of like the dev team of Descent, some famous designers and stuff. And I always think those are fun. And then there was just a lot of fan made content for Descent 1, 2. People were releasing adventures, or not, I guess, scenarios. And I also have like a bunch of homemade 3D tiles and stuff for that version. And I've painted up my first edition a long time ago and stuff. So I don't know. I like that version, and we got all the time in the world to play. So who cares how long it is?
And so, how good is the story this game tells? And you're a role player, and story is central to role playing. Can it even come close to D&D?
It is not a role playing game for sure, right? There are stories that you can tell, but it's more of a tactical combat game. It's actually not even a combat game if you look at it. Descent is a race, right? So if you play Descent, especially the first edition, as the game master, or I forget what they call the person that's controlling all the monsters, like you, if you just go into rooms and start hacking and slashing all the monsters that show up, you are 100% going to lose, because like the dungeon master or whatever, it just can keep spawning stuff, and you're going to die. So in Descent, the first edition, it's a race. Like you got to get in those rooms, grab the treasure, and get to the next room before the next thing happens. Um, so I don't think there's a whole lot of time for storytelling. Obviously, like each scenario has like an intro text similar to like Gloomhaven or something like that. And especially with the campaign modes, there's two different campaigns for the first edition of Descent. One is water ocean based, and the other one's not. I can't remember what they're called off the top of my head. But yeah, there is some story, but it's light. It's not particularly well written. It's full of like fantasy cliches. So for me, Descent is more of just like the tactical experience, less the storytelling.
And has this game been an inspiration to you?
Um, I would say it's been an inspiration in what not to do. So when I first started working on Role Player, I wanted to make a game about creating characters. And there's kind of this built-in thing when people play these fantasy games and they create a character, and then they want to do something with that character, and like that's not what the design mantra was for a role player. It was just, it's a game about making the characters, and that's it. Like, and I used to think to myself, like, if you want to take these characters and go on adventures with them, then go play Descent. Go play Mice and Mystics. Go play. There's a bunch of these kind of tactical move square to square dungeon crawl games that exist. Like, I'm not that interested in making a game like that, because there's other people that are already doing that, and they're probably doing it better than I would anyway. And then when it came to role player adventures, where we're actually taking these characters and we're going on adventures, um, those games aren't a map grid with dudes moving. I can move 3 spaces and attack once. Like, that's not that game. That game is focused on the narrative, and that actually kind of harkens back to what I love about playing role playing games. Like, to me, there's two kind of core elements of role playing games. One is the stats on your paper, your movement speed, like the min maxing of all that stuff. And then the other part is the theater of the mind, like the part where I'm like describing things and I'm having conversations with characters, and I'm kind of exploring the world in that way. And that's the side that I always love. And honestly, when I play regular role playing games, oftentimes I disregard a lot of the mechanical pieces about, you can get one long rest and 2 short rests and stuff like that. Like, I don't care about that stuff. I like role playing games that are more theater of the mind. So even like as a result, I ended up liking games in the world of darkness, like the werewolf and vampire games, and I always love interesting settings. Like Shadowrun is always a role playing game that I always loved because I love the setting. I don't really love the mechanical pieces much in terms of like how to do skill checks and damage modifiers and that kind of stuff. So Descent is the kind of game that I wouldn't make, but I still love it. It's just not a thing that inspires me to make the next great point to point dungeon crawl game. I'm just not that interested in that.
So you've mentioned it before, but I'd like to go over it a bit deeper. Your work in video games. So how did you go from being someone who'd studied sound production to entering the world of video games?
Yeah, so you start at the bottom. I was working in a recording studio, and I was seeing lots of people like busting their butts to try to get an opportunity to get these jobs that didn't pay much at all. And I could see, the days of digital recording stations at people's houses was booming. And I was like, these recording studios are not going anywhere, and I had bills to pay. So at the time, I went to this website at the time. I don't know if it still exists, monster.com. And I found people that were desperately looking for, QA testers in the area. And I had the time, and I know a thing or two about video games, went in for an interview, and then I'm starting at the very bottom, right? I'm I'm a QA guy, finding bugs in video games. And then it's just a matter of like working my way through the company in terms of, oh, this guy is like, he can do some managerial tasks. And so maybe he's in charge of this. And then they need people on these music games. Oh, Keith has music background. You should pull him over. So it just became like a move up within the company kind of thing. And then just kind of proving my value. And then that was on the publishing side at Konami. And then my position ended there. They shut down our office, and I was kind of looking for another job. And a recruiter that was looking for kind of work at a local game developer, which was Raven Software. They were looking for people, and I joined almost at a similar level, like a QA tester position, and then I quickly shot up through their production staff as well. So there's no magic to it, It's just there were jobs available. I interviewed, I did a good job, and they gave me promotions. And it's worked out.
And so you were a producer, and it's one of those titles that tells you absolutely nothing. So what does a producer of a video game actually do?
Yeah, so even different industries, the word producer means something different. But in the world of video games, it's pretty much like a project manager. So, for example, when I was at Raven as a producer, for a time I was in charge of, I had some of the single player teams. So like groups of animators and 3D artists and scripters and designers and builders. They're tasked to like build this level, and then I'm basically overseeing them, like helping them organize their schedule, making sure I'm scheduling meetings, getting the right people talking to each other, managing like which bugs go to which people to fix, and then you become like a go-to person. Like somebody has a random problem and they go to their producer first to try to find the solution or whatever. So they're kind of wranglers of cats and to some degree, and just kind of working with creative people, working to like push them forward and to get the job done. So, and then later on when I was at Raven, I was managing the team that was I was managing outsourcing for downloadable content. So I was working with external asset creators, like companies overseas that were making weapons or for the game, or different skins or character models, and just kind of communicating with them, making sure that they know what their deadlines are, kind of approving the assets they deliver, and then organizing feedback back to them if they need to make revisions. So it's kind of it's a very liquid role, right? It was different every day, because different problems come up every day, and it's definitely very goal oriented, which is fun. It's like at the end of the day, the game comes out, and it's like I manage the teams that built these 3 levels, and that feels really good. And then you can kind of move on to the next game that has different requirements and different goals and different environments and different story beats. So yeah, it's I like being a producer in video games, and I think it's rewarding. It doesn't need like one specific skill. It's definitely like a jack of all trades, problem solver, kind of looking for opportunities to improve things, and kind of grease the wheels of creativity.
And so you said you moved from Konami to Raven, and Raven are mostly known for Call of Duty. Was that your role at Raven, working with Call of Duty, or did you do other things?
Yeah, I mean, Raven has a long history of making different types of games, but when I was there, the first game I worked on was a Wolfenstein game, and they had just finished up a Wolverine game that came out at the same time as the movie. And then they did a bunch of Marvel games before that. But the majority of the time that I was there, they were working on Call of Duty games. So Call of Duty is made by multiple development studios, Infinity Ward, and a few others. And Raven was kind of like the team that would come in and basically plug all the holes. Like, say the core development team is like been working on the game for 2 years. They're in their last year, and these are the 5 places they're falling down. Let's just hand that stuff to Raven, and then they're gonna, finish those things. And like a lot of like the best levels in those games, I like to say, are the at least the ones that are noted the most were the ones that we did, and people from the other teams really appreciated us coming in and helping out and helping them finish out their game. So as a result, like we would work on every single Call of Duty game. It's like we would come in on the last year of every single one. So some of those teams they'd have these 3-year projects, and then but Raven was always on the last year of every one, which was nice because we got to change projects all the time and keep it fresh and mix it up. And we were also the most knowledgeable about what the other teams were doing. So if Team A is working on a game for 3 years and then Team B is working on a different game, they're not necessarily talking to each other that much. But because we worked on every game, we were kind of a source of truth for all the games because we worked on more of them than anybody else did.
And so in 2021, you'd left Raven by this point, but there was some controversy with the laying off employees, which led to the formation of a union, which was quite a sort of landmark thing within the video game industry. Sort of, what is your view on that? And are you surprised that it was Raven that was the sort of flashpoint for it?
I was a little surprised. I mean, the unionization efforts were coming primarily from their QA department, which I interacted with a lot, and I've managed QA departments before and been in QA departments. So like, I have like a mixed feeling about it, right? So, and I wasn't there for at least a year or two before this happened, but definitely when that's tricky being a temp QA person. Because like you come in and you work on the project and you're a temp employee and you know that going in. But when you work a temp job for 8 to 12 hours a day for a year or two, it starts to not really feel like a temp job anymore. It feels like, it starts to feel like a permanent position. And then when the work dries up and there's kind of a natural contraction of work needed, and then the management's like, okay, we don't need you guys right now. Your temp contract's over. When we need you again, we'll contact you. That can be a shock, right? Because it doesn't feel like a temp job at that point. So, I don't know. Like, I think in general, I think unions can do a lot for people. I think it helps kind of correct some abuse that employers kind of maybe, I don't know, inadvertently or intentionally kind of take advantage of their employees. And I think it's having another body to kind of, communicate for them and leverage the bargaining power that they have. So in general, I'm kind of pro-union. I was kind of surprised at the stuff happening at Raven, but I don't know, like it's hard for me to say a whole lot because I wasn't kind of in the thick of it, but I think in the end, it's a good thing, and I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's kind of a history of kind of overworking and video game developers, and so I think anytime we're kind of shining a light on negative things that are happening with the intention of improving people's work-life balance and improving their compensation and improving their lives and valuing those people, I think it's a good thing. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes, like how many more kind of unionizations will happen throughout the video game industry. But I was a little surprised that it was happening in my hometown at like my previous employer. So yeah, I don't know. That's about it.
So your next game then is one of my favourites, and this is War of the Ring. So how well does this evoke the books, do you think?
I mean, so War of the Ring is in my opinion the best Lord of the Rings game, right? I think it's the most immersive of every Lord of the Rings game. Every time you play it, there's events from the books that are happening, but they're not always happening in the same order, and they don't always happen in any particular play. So yeah, it feels just like you're in the world, and anything can happen within a certain range. Are you going to go through Moria and awaken the Balrog, or are you going to like take the longer way? And like they don't do that in the books, but you can do that in the board game. There's kind of like a lot of what ifs that you can explore in War of the Ring. and it's such a grand. I feel like it's a grand game. It's on this huge scale. It takes a long time to play, and it's one versus one. I mean, the box says 2 to 4, but let's be honest, it's really a two-player game, and
Absolutely.
it's it's I don't know. There's something. It just feels like you've got all these interesting options. You're playing the odds about like the Sauron player putting dice in the hunt box to figure out like how much pressure they want to put on the movement of the Fellowship moving towards Mount Doom, and at the expense of doing other things like. You can't organize your troops as well or move them as much if you're putting a lot of pressure on the Fellowship, but maybe the Fellowship doesn't plan on moving this turn anyway. So you're kind of trying to figure out what you think the other player is going to do. It's a game that's full of surprises. It's a game that's full of options, and it's probably the most immersive game I've ever played. So yeah, I love that game.
And do you have a preferred side to play?
I think the Sauron player is more fun, but the playing on the Fellowship side is cool too. I think I've got maybe like an evil streak inside me. I just like playing the bad guy. And yeah, I just like being the bad guy for sure.
And so, you've got your own fantasy world, and, you've chosen War of the Ring and Descent. I mean, how important to you is fantasy as a genre?
So, I mean, I love fantasy, like, the two big genres, well, maybe there's three. Well, when I think of sci-fi, fantasy, these are both really big. And then there's like kind of, I don't know what I would put a bunch of Euro games into the category of like, world history or kind of country development or like running cities. Like that's like a separate thing. And I love fantasy games. It seems like a lot of other people like fantasy games. The idea of living in another world, kind of that is close to our own, but definitely different. That has different rules, and it's such. I don't know. There's like so much you can do in the world of fantasy, and I like the escapism of it. I like the idea of being a hero. I think everybody, even when I was working on video games, there was a lot of discussion about like. Things that you want to do in games is make the player feel like a hero, make them feel strong, make them feel powerful. Because a lot of times in our lives, we don't feel powerful, right? We are subject to the man. The tax man's taking our money, and our bosses are telling us like we have to work on the weekend, and so like you feel like powerless oftentimes in the real world. So in a fantasy world, like all that goes away, and you can be the hero, and that's really appealing. The I don't know. That's the part of fantasy that I like, and it's also somewhat like I don't. There's no like you can kind of do whatever you want, right? You don't have to like. If I do a game about I don't know about the rise of some city, then like there's a lot of work that has to be done in terms of like making sure that it's accurate and try to make sure that like these events that were important at the time are captured in the gameplay, and maybe that's not what you want the gameplay to cover. In fantasy, you can. It's kind of a blank slate. You can kind of do whatever you think is cool, and that's one of the other reasons I like doing fantasy games. Yeah.
So I want to talk now about what you're known for in the murky world of board games, and that's Thunderworks Games. So how did you come up with the idea of role player?
Yeah. So role player was a spark of inspiration, right? So I don't know how many times this happens in somebody's life, but I definitely had the light bulb pop above my head when I was at a Protospiel convention, which there are these small conventions where designers go and they play each other's games and they give each other feedback. They're really fun and really useful as a designer. And I was just playing a friend of mine's game. It was a 16 card role playing game that he was working on. And I gave him feedback and I was like, well, I like the character creation part, but I don't like the rest of the game, you know. But then this light bulb appears above my head that says, what if there was a game that was just about making characters? You know, I've played fantasy or any kind of role playing games in person, but I play a lot of video game role playing games. So, you know, when I was working on my music games, we had character creators, and there were things like at the time Tiger Woods golf games had these amazing character creators, and you played Skyrim and these other games where like the character creation is like this big deal. I was like, well, some people just love that part of playing games. What if the game was just about that? And then it was just off to the races, right? Like then I couldn't be stopped. So I'm like at the game store buying loose dice like the next day, and I'm like mocking everything up, and like I was freaked out because I was like, this is such a good idea, you know, but I was just freaked out that I thought somebody else might do it before me. Like I'm sure this isn't like it's just like this great idea that's just like sitting in front of the face of everybody that plays games, but nobody's made this game yet. Like I gotta jump on it. So I scrambled, and I was playtesting it like 3 times a day. It was like I would playtest at lunch at work, and then an afternoon after work, and then in the evening I would try to get a playtest in as well. And it's like I'm making changes to really figure out what this game was. It is what we landed at, and sometimes I say, you know, Thunderworks. The only reason I'm doing what I'm doing is because like I built the company on this game. Without the success of Role Player, I would still probably be at Raven, kind of doing 1 or 2 games in the background until I got tired of it. So that was kind of a great moment that I appreciate. And it's interesting. The guy's game who I was playtesting at that Protospiel, he's a friend of mine, and we ended up working together hand in hand on the Role Player Adventures games. He's also a writer named James Ryan, and him and I have been working on these role player adventure games for a few years now. So everything kind of came full circle on that too, and I appreciate that moment in time for sure.
So Thunderworks, as you said, you know, you've not just published games within the role player universe. You also published Cape May and Tenpenny Parks. I mean, these are sort of Americana games, but when people, I think of Thunderworks, they think of that role player universe. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, you know, people love role player and people love all the things around it. And people, I think, really like the kind of the world building we're doing with other games like Dawn of Ulos or Lockup or Cartographers that are kind of in that world as well. And then people like that kind of growing. But I've always like, I don't know if I want to be, you know, on my headstone is like the role player guy. Like, I don't know if like I'm comfortable with that. Like I have other tastes besides fantasy games. So I want to make other games besides role player related stuff. So that's why I did a game about the Russian Revolution called the Dual Powers, and I did, you know, Cape May and Tenpenny Parks, and there's other games coming. I'm going to continue to expand the role player line, but I don't want to make it so that every game that I ever do has to be in this role player universe, because I like other stuff besides that. Maybe that's a bad like marketing thing. Like there are companies that basically focus on one game. Like I always think of, there's a game called Red Dragon Inn, which is like, that's all that company does. And they're the Red Dragon Inn company. And that's cool. And it's been successful for them. But I want to do other things. You know, I want to do things about, you know, historical events, or, you know, Tenpenny Parks is kind of a more of a family game. My criteria for, you know, publishing a game is really simple and not very scientific, of like, do I really, really like this game or not? And if I really, really like it, then I want to be the guy that brings it to the people. You know, I want to be the one that publishes it. So, and not everything has to be kind of shoehorned into this fantasy universe. If it makes sense and I think it's a good fit, it will. If it doesn't, and we have a different idea for a theme, then we'll do that. So yeah, that's kind of like my current stance on like role player world stuff.
So when you think of Thunderworks, what is your central ethos for the company, and has that changed over the almost 10 years it's been in existence?
Not, I mean, so my thought on just like Thunderworks and being a publisher has always been like since the beginning, like I want to make great games that I like, and it seems like other people like them too. And then I want to be, the quality of the components is super important. Like I come from a position of being a gamer first, and then I also publish games. So like I play games, I want them to be super high quality. So I want the games that I make to be super high quality. I want like to be able to have a relationship with the people that are making my games, and I want other people to feel that way about me and my games. So like treating customers well is like a super important thing to me. Making sure that people are getting high quality products, and then the love comes around. I love my customers, I love my games, and hopefully they're loving my games, and we'll end up loving Thunderworks too. So it's not super scientific or kind of marketing specific sounding, but it's just kind of like I want to make great games. I want to make them to be great components, and I want to take great care of my customers.
And so why is the company called Thunderworks?
So yeah, this is actually a fun story. What does Thunderworks mean? Well, so when I was the first game I ever put on Kickstarter was a game called Bullfrog. So I was prepping that game for a Kickstarter, and I was like, well, I guess I need to come up with a game name company, or a game company name, and I was looking at what other people were doing for their game companies, and I was having a hard time figuring out what I wanted to do because it was a big decision. Like, if this is going to be my company's identity till the end of time. So I thought about a lot of different things, but nothing really came to me that I thought was cool enough. And then at the time, my son was whatever 2 years old, and we were on the 4th of July, which is the U.S. Independence Day, and oftentimes people shoot off fireworks on that day. And we went to a fireworks show, and they started going off. And my son, who was just kind of learning how to talk, he called them Thunderworks, and I was like, "That's a cool company." So my son named the company, and yeah, I mean, so in the logo, there's like a little starburst with lightning bolts on it. That is supposed to represent like a firework, but that's where that came from, and I think it's a fun story, so fun to tell.
So your next game then is another classic, and this is an interpretation on a classic, and this is Brass Birmingham. So why this one and not the original Brass?
So yeah, I mean, I've been a Martin Wallace. Martin Wallace is probably my favorite designer. And this is Brass Birmingham is from him, obviously. And I had, Age of Industry is very similar to Brass. I played the original Brass. I played those games, and I like them, but they're a little long. They're a little heavy. And I guess my thought was like something from that kind of genre of games for being stuck in the cabin or whatever was great. Like one of the things about these selection of games is like, time doesn't matter anymore. Like they can be the longest games in the world. So I really enjoy those games. The new ones, they did the Kickstarter for the Lancashire and the Birmingham versions, and I like them both. But I always felt like they're too similar not to kind of I feel like you can't pick both. You should just pick one and run with it. And I thought Birmingham added the beer stuff and had more changes from the original, so it feels newer to me, and so that's why I picked that one. It's a little bit more forgiving, I think, than a Lancashire, and when you play like a game where like you make a mistake in round 2 and you're like, I'm never going to recover from this. I might as well just stop playing. That can happen in Lancashire. And in other games as well. Like I'm that way. I feel that way about Terra Mystica as well, in terms of like, if I do some suboptimal plays in the first couple of rounds, like I might as well just stop playing. So that's why I chose that one. And I love the artwork of the new game, and it's great. So
So
yeah, there's like sorry, you were gonna jump into like the English piece of it. So like, I don't know that much about English history. A lot of it I've learned through actually Martin Wallace's board games. So like some of his, I really like Tinner's Trail from him, which
mm,
is kind of set in that part of the world. Um, so uh, yeah, I don't know that much about that history of that part of the world of the Industrial Revolution and in in England, but it's definitely one of the cool things about playing board games is that like you get a little bit of history. You can learn a thing or two about these subjects that they make games about, and I mean it's true for video games as well. Like probably I learned a lot about World War II playing Call of Duty when I was a kid than I did out of any history books, but it's funny.
yeah, so one thing I can say is that Brass Birmingham is where I'm from. So all the good people come from the Midlands. So when I I've played role player and role player feels Euro-y. And Martin is a really significant figure in Euro design. You said you like him as a designer. I mean, how significant is he in your gaming life?
I mean, like I love Martin's games. I mean, he's the one designer I kind of will often highlight as being like a favorite. Like I like games from a lot of different designers, but there's Martin's the only guy that I say, "Oh, what's the next Martin Wallace game?" Like I don't care what it is, I want to play it. So Study of Emeralds, I love that game. I love Tinner's Trail. I love the brass stuff. I've played a lot of his uh, whatever the two-player snow one with the
Yeah, a
Halifax
few acres of
network
snow.
game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love all those games, and I feel like Martin's really good. Even his more modern games, his newer stuff, like um, he takes kind of mechanics that are popular that maybe are newer mechanics and like does interesting spins on them. Like, if you think of like Dominion doing deck building, like opened up that type of gameplay and like how Martin puts that into his games, but he ties it with things that I don't expect. There's um, I feel like he's willing to try weird, goofy things that like you just wouldn't think to do. Like I think Study of an Emerald is a great example of like deck building and area control and like secret role. Like how do you mix those together? Well, that's the game, and it does weird, crazy stuff. And he's. I also like the fact that he's not afraid to be mean to the players. Like, you're playing London and you're getting poverty cubes, okay? And you're going to feel bad about that, and so I like the fact that he doesn't pull punches there. And he's kind of, he'll design a game where like, in kind of what you'd expect would be like like if in a tie situation, then everybody gets points, but it's halved, or like you get like the soft, nice version of ties, and like Martin will be like, "Oh, you're tied. Nobody gets anything. Sorry, suckers." Like that just like makes me laugh, and I think it's cool that he's bold and willing to do that, to create these like really kind of negative experiences that people try hard to avoid. Right? It turns into a gameplay situation. And then players are motivated to avoid those negative consequences, and they're oftentimes harsh. Like in a Thunderworks title, what I think is like something that's like a Martin Wallacey kind of thing is in lockup. Like every once in a while, these raids occur, and the person who has the most suspicion like loses like 12 points, and that's like a pretty massive amount of points. And so it becomes like, so the players are really invested in making sure that doesn't happen to them. And so, yeah, I think that's one of Martin's things that I really like about him. And he's influenced a lot of what I do. Am I at the heart, me as a player, like my 90-minute Euro game is like my bread and butter. Like that's what I love. And then if you can marry it with a theme that makes sense and is evocative and interesting, then we're like at that's a home run or whatever. It's like top of the charts. So that's kind of what I love really good Euro games that have like, not pasted on thematic material, like something that makes sense in terms of like some historical thing or whatever the narrative of the game is.
So I want to talk about something now that kind of interests me about America. I've got a very close friend who's from New York, and I've never been to America, and he says, oh, well, you need to come to America and go to New York. And I always say to him, I don't want to go to New York particularly. I want to go to Omaha, and I want to go to Tennessee, and I want to go to these places that people don't go to, and it completely befuddles him. But, sorry, carry on.
I would say, so America, like, there is so much variety in terms of things to do. The different cultures of the different areas. Not only like, obviously people have different accents, but people talk differently. They value different things in different parts of the country. The landscape is very, different on what part of the country you go to. So, I mean, sometimes people are surprised when they hear statistics about like, some high statistic about or a high percentage of Americans don't even have passports. It's kind of like, because we got like 50 states that are all so different that like if we want to travel and find something new, we don't have to get on a plane and fly over an ocean. There's a lot of cool stuff to check out in America, and it's very kind of America-centric, which is one of the problems that comes out of that. There's a lot of benefits to seeing different parts of the world and interacting with cultures outside of America. But I mean, if someone were to say, I want to come to America, where should I go? Like, it's hard to just say one place because there's so much cool stuff in different areas. Like, New York is an amazing place. New York City is huge, and there's a lot of cool stuff there. But if you're a board gamer, maybe you want to go to Wisconsin. Maybe you want to go to Indiana and go to Gen Con, and like there's a big gaming culture there. I would say when it comes to gaming, kind of the colder the state in general, the more gaming there is. The more people are stuck inside for more months out of the year, they tend to do more gaming than the people in Florida that can live their life on the beach every day. But yeah, that would be an interesting question to pose. I think, like, if you could go to one place in America, where would you go? That's a tough question for me, even as an American.
And so, board gaming is kind of fascinating in that it's not confined to the central metropolises. I know a design community in North Carolina. You've talked about Madison. The Dice Tower is belying what you just said. The Dice Tower is based in Florida, and it seems spread across the country. Why do you think that is? Is it because there's just not a lot of money in it, and so it doesn't attract LA and New York?
Well, I mean, gaming is universal. Like, there's not like a certain type of people that likes to play board games, and it's not like they're for everybody. So I guess it depends on what you're looking for. There's these communities pop up around places that have some propensity to gaming, but they can pop up anywhere. I don't know. I guess what is this? Is there a central place for gaming in other countries? I mean, I think about Essen, and I don't really think of that as a place where that's where a lot of like board game sales happen. But I don't know of any like really strong like game design groups that hang out there or anything. It seems like it's just like an organic thing when like-minded people are in the same region, and then they start communicating, and the community pops up. I don't know.
And you're based in the centre of the country. Have you found issues, sort of logistic issues, practical issues, being based where you're based? Do you think that would be smoother if you were based in one of the big coastal cities?
No. I mean, because our customers are all over, it's actually somewhat advantageous to be in the Midwest of the U.S. So just in terms of moving stuff around, in the U.S. we have this large mountain range that's near the West Coast, the Rockies. So even like moving freight or anything across those mountains is more expensive. So to have most warehouses are serve the most people at the cheapest price kind of in this kind of Midwestern area, the middle of the country. And so they can kind of service people on the East Coast and the middle of the country. And then some people who have like board game distributors will sometimes have a warehouse in California or Arizona, somewhere on the western area of the country to service people out there. But there's definitely no disadvantages to being in the middle of the country. And I would say there's probably more game conventions that happen in the middle of the country than in the large cities.
So your next game then is a zombie game, one of the plethora of zombie games that came out around the time that this came out, and this is Last Night on Earth. Are you a fan of zombies and the horror genre in general?
I am a fan of horror in general, for sure. Like Stephen King is my favorite author. And the thing about that I like about Last Night on Earth is that it tells a story. And it tells it through the mechanics of the game, which is unlike most of these other kind of story-driven games like role-player adventures, where it's about the narrative text. Last Night on Earth tells the story through the mechanics of the game. And it has a different look to it. And at the time it came out, it was like used photographs that were had filters on them and stuff instead of using traditional illustrations. So like it looked different than other games, and it got some heat for that. But I also thought it was what made it kind of unique.
I mean, how do you feel about the cosplay art?
I think it's cool. I think it's fitting of the genre. I think it's. I don't want all my games to have photography, but I think for that game it works. And I think they did a pretty good job. So Last Night on Earth is kind of like it has that. It's telling stories as you play the game. Like when you finish a game and you can tell the story about like, oh man, I had the gas can and I was trying to fill up the truck, but the zombies knocked out the cheerleader and all this, and they couldn't throw me the keys in time. Like it creates this really fun story after you play the game. And I love games that are like that. Like Battlestar Galactica is another game that does that, where there's a story that comes out of the mechanics of the game. If we're locked in a cabin in the zombie apocalypse or whatever, like it seems like super on the nose. Like, yeah, we could be using this game to train ourselves on how to survive if we ever get out of the cabin, So yeah, I think it's a really fun game. I think the rule set is super. It's Ameritrash 100%. Like, but it embraces it, and it works well. I think it's a fun game. It has a ton of variability with lots of different scenarios that you can play, and with lots of different characters that you can play as. And it's one of those games where like your character has this ability, and it 100% represents who that character is. It's like they really do a good job of connecting a mechanic to a thematic element, and it's locked in, which makes the game really easy to learn and makes it easy to remember how the rules work, because they're so tied to the thematic material of the game.
So I want to talk now about the future. So you sort of talked about some of the games in the Thunderworks catalog, but what's coming from Thunderworks in the future?
Yeah, so big stuff coming. So obviously we're finishing up the Dawn of Willows Kickstarter campaign, and that'll come out next summer. We have another Kickstarter coming November 1st for the next campaign for Role Player Adventures. That is called Golpax's Secret. It requires the base game to play, which I know was kind of hard to get, especially outside of the US in the last 2 years. So we're going to do a reprint of the base game plus the first expansion, which is called Nephros' Judgment. And then we're going to do the new campaign, which is 7 adventures long. It'll be a similar price point to the expansion, so it's going to be not a super expensive box like the base game is. And so that'll come out probably September of 2023. We have another project. It's interesting. I haven't done a Kickstarter in over a year, and now I'm doing a bunch in a row. I'm in February. I plan on doing another project for a cyberpunk themed game called Metro Runner, and that is 100% a Euro game that's tied into the theme of being like a hacker and solving kind of number puzzles and moving around the city and completing jobs. And you're kind of trying to increase your notoriety, but also kind of doing jobs for the corporation that you're kind of aligned with. So that will that will go to Kickstarter in February. It's called Metro Runner. And then I have a straight to retail product that's going to come out in March of 2023 called Goblin Vaults that I designed with one of my buddies who helped me out on Role Player back in the day. We actually we shared an office at Raven, but his name is Eric Schlotman, and we worked together on Goblin Vaults. It's a standalone kind of traditional card game, but it doesn't work like many other card games I've played before. But you're basically kind of you're bidding your cards so that you can try to get other cards into an area in front of you called the vault, and you do scoring at the end of the game based on a variety of different cards that might be in play, and then based on different card positions in your vault. So that one's a 20-minute game, kind of small box like Cartographers. That'll be a $25 price point USD. So that comes out in March. That one's going straight to retail. We'll do some pre-orders for it, and then it'll go into retail end of March, early April. Is there anything else I can talk about? Jeez. Those are kind of the things for next year. But I've got a lot of other fun things in the pipe that are coming. So those are the next kind of 4 games.
And so when you think about Thunderworks, what does it offer that other publishers in the industry don't?
That's a tough one, right? I think Thunderworks games are great. Of course, I think people have found that if they find a Thunderworks game, they tend to like other Thunderworks games. So I feel like we've had a really good track record of great games that people have enjoyed. I don't know if that's true for other publishers. I don't know what makes any publisher unique. That's a tough call. So great games and great service, and I don't know. That's an interesting idea. I should think about more.
And so, do you have a dream game that you would like to design yourself?
So Role Player Adventures was that dream game. I was kind of considering my magnum opus. And when we were working on it, and I was just like, I just have to make sure that I survive long enough for this game to come out. Like this is my dream. But that's been accomplished, right? So now I need to reset the goal, right? So currently the goal is there's probably to finish a game that I kind of did on my own. There's a game that I've been working on since the beginning. Actually, it was the first game I started working on, and then I ended up side tabling it because I thought the production was going to be too complex for my experience level, because it has miniatures and multiple boards and lots of cards, and that is a robot combat game, and that is currently called Arsenal. But I'm considering changing it because I know there's a lot of football fans out there that.
Well, I certainly wouldn't buy it if it was called Arsenal. Yeah. Call it Liverpool, and then I'm all over it.
Let me write that down real quick. Yeah. So that currently the dream is to get that out, and that's something that I actually started picking up again in the last 6 months, and trying to move towards actually releasing that someday. So that's the current kind of dream project.
So, you've worked in digital games and you moved over to analog games and you've made it your career. I mean, where would you like to see Thunderworks in the next 5 years?
So, I mean, I definitely am interested in, seeing the company grow. We started small and we're growing a little bit at a time. And part of that process is one of the things that I've never done before is run a company and figure out how best to do that and how to, be the leader for people on the team and really drive it in a particular direction and make sure that everybody knows their role and is contributing and feeling valued and doing meaningful work. So I'd love to see Thunderworks continue in that direction. I don't know if our 3-person company will be, a 20-person company in 5 years, but I think we'll continue to add people to take on specific roles. There's things that Thunderworks does well, and there's things Thunderworks doesn't do well. Things like marketing and sales and retailer support, and those are areas that we're continuing to improve. But I think there's a lot of room to grow there. I think at the end of the day, we'll probably still continue to do 3, 4, 5 games a year, and but what I really want to do is support them even more with whether it be some kind of like retailer in-store promotions or organized play, or like making sure that we're communicating better with our distribution partners, or creating more cool opportunities for our consumers. Like those are areas that I want to see grow and improve. And we kind of just work towards that every year. Sometimes you don't know what you need until you need it. In terms of like just getting better, figuring out where we're falling down and improving those areas. Like that's where I see Thunderworks kind of focusing our efforts. So that's about it, I guess, in terms of where we're going to be in 5 years.
So your last game then is a cheat that a lot of people have made on this podcast,
right?
And this is a standard deck of playing cards,
right?
So why do you think on that so many people have chosen this? Is it just because is it the gamer inside everyone and they've just completely gamed the system?
I mean, it is a traditional deck of playing cards is a Pandora's box of gaming, right? So you can there's an infinite number of games you can play with it. Not only like obviously the popular ones that people know from when you're a kid and you play Go Fish, or you play Solitaire as a single player, Klondike Solitaire. So it's such a versatile thing, and it's also a great platform to design new games with, right? So my very first game I published, Bullfrogs, the prototype used a standard deck of cards, and with some modifications. So that's not only is there no shortage of games to play if you're going to be stuck somewhere for an infinite, for some unknown period of time, you're never going to run out of cool games to play. And then you also can exercise your design brain and come up with new games with that same thing. So it's I can understand why it's a super popular choice because it makes a lot of sense when you're kind of stuck one place for a long period of time.
And so do you think that cards are really the heart of game design?
I would say yes. I mean, they're such a versatile asset, right? So cards can you've got a randomization engine built in, in terms of drawing cards. You've got ability to hide information from other players for them being one-sided, and then and they're a great place to hold text or have any kind of instruction. They're easy to transport. They're affordable to manufacture. Like I think cards are the greatest. I don't know. Is it cards are the greatest like component of all board games? Like there are very few games that don't have any cards in them, and there's a reason for that because they're great. Yeah.
And so, gamers, because of the novelty of hobby games, could be a bit sniffy around traditional card games. Have you got one traditional card game you can think of that you'd recommend the people listening to this to go out and play?
Like I agree that people who are in this hobby tend to poo-poo traditional card games. I mean, I think a lot of it is because they don't have like fancy illustrations on them, and there are things that they've seen 1,000 times. That when you play a traditional card game, you don't have any of the thematic window dressing that you have in kind of a modern board or card game. So people are so used to kind of using those illustrations and those special icons and those special things to immerse themselves into the theme. When you play a traditional card game, you don't have any of that. It's core mechanics. And, I think some people have kind of grown to appreciate having all the thematic things that help them learn games and help them get immersed into what they're doing. But if I were to play one, I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but probably my favorite traditional card game is poker. Like, there's so much. The thing that I like about that game is that there's so much. There's a lot of opportunities for bluffing and for kind of identifying people's tells, and also because oftentimes you're playing for real money, right? And so once you throw real money into the equation, games get a lot more interesting for people because the stakes feel much more real. There's no like, oh, good game, buddy, talk to you later. It's like, that dude has $5 of my dollars or whatever, and I don't like that. And I'm much more motivated to continue playing or to get better at the games that we're playing because the stakes are more real.
So I've got one more question for you then. So you're heading out of Madison into the countryside to the cabin, and you go around a corner and the back door of the car flies open. 4 of the games fly down a ravine into a river and are swept away to posterity. Which game do you hope is sitting on the backseat of the car?
War of the Ring is the winner on this one. Like, it is my favorite game. And I think when you are, you're in the apocalypse and you want to escape the world, that game is the one that pulls me out of the real world the most and lets me live in a fantasy world that doesn't have the same worries as the real world does.
Excellent. So if people want to get hold of you, if they want to see what Thunderworks are up to, how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, you can always visit www.thunderworksgames.com, and you can always email me directly as keith@thunderworksgames.com, or like our kind of customer service kind of general question area is info@thunderworksgames.com. But I'm also available on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and so you can definitely look up Thunderworks Games, and I'm me and my team are really easy to contact and really responsive as well. So if you ever want to reach out about anything, we're available to help, and we're happy to do that.
Brilliant. Well, Keith Matejka, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun.
You can support the show in many ways. You can tell your friends. You can talk about it on social media. You can talk about it in your own blog, podcast, or video. You can support it directly by going to patreon.com/5G4D for a rolling donation, or for a one-off donation, hitting the PayPal link at the bottom of the website, 5gamesfordoomsday.com. It's these donations that keep the show going. Also, if you want to say something nice about the show, if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on Twitter at 5gamesfordoomsday, or send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. And if I've managed to sashay away from the lamb choppers and pageantry, so much bloody pageantry, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.